Starting next month, my eldest son and his wife will move in with us. You don't have any say in it since you just lounge around all day. I'm not lounging around all day, I do housework and work from home. Well, it's only natural for a wife to do housework. And you call that a job? It's just working from home, no different from being unemployed. I don't need a freeloader for a wife. If you have a problem, you can leave right now. For years, my husband Ken had stopped listening to me. Ken decided unilaterally to live with our eldest son and his wife and tried to kick me out. He glared at me with a mix of irritation and anger, but I calmly told him. What? Who are you talking about? I moved into a new place with a rent of $7,000. What are you talking about? Moved into a $7,000 rent place? Who would believe such a lie? I don't have time for your jokes. I'm going on a trip from today. Don't you dare call me while I'm away. Saying that, Ken proudly left the house. What a fool. Calling me a freeloader without knowing anything. Well, he'll be the one to regret it, not me. I'll start preparing right away. That's what I thought as I made a phone call on my smartphone. A few days later, while I was relaxing in my room, my phone vibrated. It was Ken's name on the display. I hadn't noticed because I had kept it on silent mode on the sofa, but it seems Ken had been calling me several times. I was going to ignore it. But then I remembered today was the day Ken was supposed to return from his trip. Hello? It's about time, Julie. Where are you now? As soon as I answered, Ken screamed in a frantic tone. When I got home, all the furniture and appliances were gone. You did this while I was away, didn't you? I had the movers take them out. What? Moved out? You really moved? You're the one who told me to leave. But that doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want. The place is empty. Our son and his wife are supposed to live here too. How are we all supposed to live like this? Well, all the furniture and appliances were bought by me with my savings from before we were married, so I can do whatever I want with them, right? I know you bought them, but... As I responded with a cool tone, my husband's voice became weak. It seems he understands, after all. My husband, who spends money as soon as he has it, has been without savings since we got married. I've bought all the furniture and appliances for the house in his stead. It's only natural that I would take them with me when I moved. But his calm was only momentary. Just because you bought it with your money doesn't mean you can move it out without permission. A wife's belongings are her husband's too. He exploded over the phone. It seems arguing with this man is pointless, as usual. He's still as selfish as ever. I smirk internally and retort. Who are you to say that? You decided to live with our son and his wife without asking me. My husband Ken had decided to have our eldest son and his wife move in without consulting me and tried to kick me out. So, I left the house without consulting him, taking my possessions with me. But it seems his anger isn't subsiding. He yelled so loudly I thought my ears might break. Acting all high and mighty when you're nothing but a freeloader. Listen here. Come back right now. And put everything back the way it was. Huh. I sighed quietly. It's always like this with him. When he's at a disadvantage, he resorts to yelling. But unfazed, I calmly responded to my furious husband. I told you before you went on your trip, I moved to a new place. It's over an hour's drive from your house, so I can't just come back immediately. What did you say? I'll bring the divorce papers tomorrow, so please sign them. Divorce papers? Don't joke with me. I won't agree to a divorce. He continued to rant, but I hung up the phone. I was so tired of his foolishness, I didn't want to talk anymore. He tells me to leave but dislikes the idea of divorce. Doesn't he see the contradiction? Well, I understood why my husband was hesitant about divorce. Despite persistent calls from him, I turned off my phone because it was annoying. He must have returned from his trip in a good mood. It was a reunion and hot springs trip with some old college friends. He must have brought back lots of souvenirs. Yet, when he opened the front door, he must have been stunned to see the empty room. Just imagining his foolish expression makes me smile. He might as well despair in that empty room. The next day, I went back to the house where my husband was. It's a Scandinavian-style house in a quiet residential area. It's strange how it felt like someone else's home even though I had lived there for decades. Maybe it's because I no longer had any attachment to the house or my husband. I slowly parked the car beside the entrance. Perhaps he noticed I was there from the engine noise, as he immediately came out to meet me. "Jolie, you really did it now." He greeted me angrily. But his expression changed the moment he saw who was getting out of the car with me. "What, Mike? Lynn is here too." It wasn't just me, our son and his wife were with me as well. "Why are Mike and Lynn here?" My husband was a bit flustered since I hadn't told him in advance that I was bringing our son and his wife. However, "Hi, Father, we're here to visit." Lynn greeted him with a smile, and his face brightened. "Oh, Lynn! Please, come in, come in." His tone was much gentler than when he greeted me. As if he was delighted. He had always wanted to live with our son and his wife. He welcomed them into the house, seemingly forgetting I was even there, pushing them inside enthusiastically. "We'll soon be living here together, right? I'm so happy to live in such a lovely house with a garden." The eldest son's wife was in a good mood. Normally, you wouldn't want to live with your in-laws, but according to her, she had always lived in small apartments since she was young, so living in a spacious house was her dream. However, in contrast to the cheerful husband and daughter-in-law, the eldest son, Mike, had been silent all this while. "What's wrong, Mike? Are you feeling unwell?" The husband looked puzzled at the unusual demeanor of their son, who typically initiates conversations, so his silence was out of character. "Hey Mike, I just got back from a trip, you know? The hot springs were fantastic. Of course, I bought souvenirs for you and Lynn, too." Despite his bright attempts at conversation, Mike didn't respond. Deciding that it was futile to keep trying, the husband shrugged and opened the living room door. As soon as he entered the room, Mike finally spoke up. "Dad, what's going on? The room is practically empty." This. The husband grimaced. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, he turned to his son and daughter-in-law. "It's a mess, really. Your mom had the movers take everything out without telling me. She says since she bought it all with her own money, she can do whatever she wants, but it's too much, isn't it? To take all the furniture and appliances when you are going to live here. She must have been upset because I decided on my own with your move, but it's hard to believe a mother wouldn't like the idea of living with son and his wife." The husband glanced briefly at me, then turned back to Mike. "It's wasteful for just an old couple to live in such a big house. Maybe your mom doesn't want to be burdened with babysitting if you guys have kids. I'd be thrilled to take care of my grandchildren, but your mom's just cold." I couldn't help but smirk. He always left parenting up to me, yet now he claims he'd be different with grandchildren. But that's typical of him. He's probably forgotten he never had any real parenting experience. Perhaps he even wanted Mike to agree that I am a selfish mother who doesn't think about her children. Mike, for his part, didn't even frown and remained expressionless, ignoring his father's talk. Perhaps out of impatience, the husband asked, "What do you think, Mike? Don't you think your mom is terrible?" As the husband peered into his son's face, Mike unzipped his bag and pulled out a tablet. In front of my bewildered husband, a video starts playing on the tablet. "What is this?" my husband exclaims, his eyes wide as he stares at the tablet. The video shows a scene where my husband is yelling at me. "Hey Jolie. The dinner's not ready yet. Making your husband wait is a sign of a bad wife. There's dust on the stairs, go pick it up right now. Can't you even clean properly? How long have you been a housewife?" Watching the video, I marvel at how clearly he verbally abused his wife. It sounds like something out of a comic book, but he's serious when he says these things. "Mike! When did you record this?" My husband hastily snatches the tablet from our son and clutches it to his chest. I didn't record it. Mom gave me this video. Hearing this from our son, my husband looks at me. Huh? Jolie did. Actually, I've been recording your abuse with a hidden camera to keep evidence. Mike needed to know the truth about you. I was smiling sweetly. So that's why Mike has been so quiet. It seemed my husband finally got it. Yes, Mike had been silent because he was furious with his father. Mike looked straight at his father and said, "It seems like you've been pretending to be a good father in front of me, but you've been constantly abusing Mom like this. Even the living arrangement, you lied, right? You said Mom was insisting on living with us, making it sound like you were indulging her whims, but in reality, you decided by yourself." No, that's not true. I wasn't abusing anyone. It was just a bad moment during an argument. And I suggested living together thinking of Mom's best interests. We're both in our 50s and still young, but eventually, we'll grow old and won't be able to move around. It's safer if we live with our son and his wife. Realizing that Mike already knew his true nature, my husband was panicked. Mike listened silently to his father's excuses. Thinking Mike understood, my husband's face relaxed with relief. Exactly, Mike is my son. You've always been a daddy's boy. I knew you'd be on my side. You know best that I wouldn't abs your mom. He reached out to pat Mike on the shoulder, but then, "Actually, there's something else I want you to see." Mike took the tablet back from his father and played another video. What? There's more? My husband stopped in his tracks. Then he stood with his mouth agape, frozen. The video showed my husband and Lynn, our son's wife, embracing each other in our living room, where we all were gathered. I had already seen this footage, but no matter how many times I watched it, it was revolting and nauseating. Never would have guessed, my own father and wife having an affair. Mike said to his stunned father. My husband muttered, avoiding eye contact with Mike. Mike, how long have you known? About 6 months. Lynn started leaving the house often. I didn't mind her going out, and I left it alone for a while, but when she started coming home late repeatedly, I suspected she was cheating and started investigating. The evidence was damning. Lynn was meeting a man secretly, and that man was you, Dad. So, I knew you were pretending to be a good father long before Mom told me about your true nature. A good father wouldn't seduce his son's wife. My husband was speechless. Too embarrassed to say anything after desperately making excuses without knowing anything. So, Lynn, since Dad seems unable to respond, why don't you explain the affair? Lynn bit her lip and remained silent. Everything was out in the open now. There was no way she could make excuses at this point. Or so I thought. It's Mike's fault. Incredibly, Lynn blamed Mike, boldly defending her actions. She had been shaking and looking away from the video just moments ago, but her quick shift was impressive. I was dissatisfied with my marriage to Mike. I thought marrying Mike, who works at a big company and earns a lot, would mean I could enjoy some luxuries. But Mike is too serious and strict with money. He nags about keeping a detailed budget and only gives me a little allowance. I got so fed up with Mike that I had an affair to take a break. Honestly, there's no point in being married if a high earner won't let me spend freely. In other words, Lynn married Mike for his money. Hearing it from her directly, however, made it all the more infuriating. Then Mike asked his wife, "So why did you specifically have an affair with my father?" "Because Ken listens to everything I say." Lynn said this with a sly grin. Unlike Mike, Ken is generous and indulges all my whims. That's why I switched. I see. You wanted that luxury life so badly. But Dad has a wife, my mom. Didn't you feel any guilt about stealing someone's husband? Mike asked, clearly angry despite his controlled demeanor. But Lynn retorted with a flippant expression. Guilt? None at all. Because your mom is just a freeloader. She claims she's working from home, but according to Ken, she's just playing on the computer. An old woman who doesn't do any housework and just plays around is worth dumping. Mike quickly countered. Who's the one not doing any housework? You're a housewife, yet you spend your evenings out and only use the house for your hobbies when you're home, hardly doing any housework. Yet, Lynn was unapologetic. I'm still young and pretty, and that alone gives me value, right? But in your mom's case, she's just old and useless. If she was working outside like your dad, it might be different, but she's just earning pin money at home. Wow, you really don't know anything. Mike said, exasperated. Then, picking up the tablet again, he revealed. Actually, Mom works from home as a web writer. When she talks about working from home, she means she's writing, earning money by writing novels and blogs. A writer? Ken was puzzled. He had no interest in her and had ridiculed her work, not even knowing what she did. No way. There's no way such a plain old lady could be writing novels. Lynn couldn't believe Mike's words. And laughed derisively. Then, Mike showed the tablet screen to both of them. You've seen this text before, right? Huh? What is that? What? Something your mom wrote? Ken and Lynn leaned in close to the tablet. After a while of reading the text on the screen, Ken quickly looked away. Huh, I've never seen anything like this. Must be some amateur playing around with writing, right? But Lynn was fixated on the screen. Then she murmured, could this novel be? And stared intently at me. Mike then said to her, it seems you've realized it. Your hobby was reading romance novels, right? Especially, you had a favorite author, and you'd get so absorbed in her novels that you'd forget to eat or sleep. That author whose novels you cherished is my mom. No way. Lynn's face turned pale. She had been a devoted reader of the novels without knowing I was the author. I really admired the author of this novel. I've read many techniques of romance, but very few can entertain people like this. But to think that the author was my mother-in-law. You know Mom has a lot of fans, right? If she's this famous, you can imagine how much she earns. Aren't you embarrassed to have called her a freeloader just because she stays at home? I'm so sorry. Suddenly, Lynn knelt down and prostrated herself in front of me. Mother, I didn't know anything. I'm truly sorry. Looking closer, tears were brimming in her eyes. She had despised and mistreated the person she admired most, taking her husband and calling her a freeloader. She must have deeply regretted her actions. Her forehead nearly touching the floor, Lynn repeatedly apologized like chanting a spell. It seems she was a fan of my romance novels, which made me feel somewhat sorry for her. Among my works were stories about forbidden love between in-laws and siblings. Certainly, she hadn't modeled her affair after my novels, but if she was influenced even a little, it was a complex feeling. Yet, I hardened my heart and said, you're apologizing to the wrong person. Lynn slowly raised her head. Her makeup was smeared, and because of her heavy eye makeup, the area around her eyes was pitch black. The one who's most hurt this time is Mike. I only had my husband cheat on me, but Mike was betrayed by both his wife and father. Then Lynn hurriedly turned to Mike, apologizing just as she had done to me. Mike, I'm sorry. I didn't know your mother was a novelist, and I had an affair with your father. I truly admire your mother. I won't disrespect her anymore, please forgive me. But Mike coldly rejected her. Not knowing is no excuse. The fact that you had an affair doesn't change. Even if Mom was just a homemaker and not a writer, there's no reason for you to have called her a freeloader. I understand, but still. Lynn cried, clinging to Mike. Watching this, my husband finally seemed to believe me. So, was it true that Jolie moved to a new place with a rent of $7,000? He asked hesitantly while cautiously looking at my face, to which I responded with exasperation. It seems you finally believe me. That's how much I've been earning from my novels and blogs. To you, it probably just looked like I was playing on the computer. Oh, I was wrong. I'll take a leaf out of your book and start working seriously too. Of course, I'll break up with Lynn. So please, let's start over. Don't talk about divorce, please. Before I could finish speaking, my husband was prostrating himself in front of Mike and me. He was shaking, desperately pleading. However, I felt no sympathy for him. Work seriously, he said. That's laughable. I muttered to myself, and decided to deliver the final blow by revealing a certain fact. While you were on your trip, a termination notice arrived. What? My husband looked at me, dumbfounded, his mouth agape. He seemed unable to grasp the situation for a while but eventually changed his expression and exclaimed. Fired? You're kidding. It's true. I kept it because it's yours. Didn't you notice? I said as I stood up, picked up an envelope that had been left on the shoe cabinet, and handed it to my husband. He snatched the envelope from me and trembled as he pulled out the document inside. He then looked down at the signature but eventually slowly looked up. Hey, why have you been silent about this? Because you told me not to call you during your trip. I did say that, but don't take everything I say so literally. My husband slumped his shoulders. The termination notice had arrived the day after he left for his trip. Normally, one would immediately inform the person, but I remained silent, obeying his instructions not to contact him. The reason for your termination left me in disbelief. You had been committing fraud at work. It seems you were caught due to an internal whistleblower. I find it hard to believe someone who's been fired for fraud could just change and start working seriously. Then I declared firmly. I'm divorcing you. You call your wife a freeloader, you cheat with your son's wife, and you get fired. There is no way I can be happy with a man like this scum. And with that, I slapped the signed divorce papers in front of my husband and started to leave the house. Wait, Jolie! My husband grabbed my arm. Looking up at me with a face about to cry, he said. I really am sorry. I should have valued you more. From now on, I won't say terrible things or push household chores onto you. I need you. Please don't go. Don't abandon me. I coldly replied. What you need isn't me, it's money, right? Why don't you be honest? You have debts, don't you? My husband, pointedly called out, showed a bewildered expression, but eventually resignedly admitted. That's right. Actually, I've racked up debts because I spent too much on Lynn. I suggested living with Mike and Lynn not only because I wanted to live with her but also because I thought I could rely on Mike financially if we lived together. My husband, although a manager, was not the one supporting our lifestyle, I was. Yet, his wallet was always empty before payday. Spent on drinks, gambling, and gifts for his mistress, and on top of that, he was in debt. In contrast, our son Mike managed his finances tightly, controlling the family budget and saving for the future. My husband knew this, which is why he was insistent on living with Mike and his wife. He talked about caring for grandchildren, but his main goal was money. It's pathetic for a father to be like this. Yet, my husband had the audacity to say, I truly regret what I did to Mike, but it's not just my and Lynn's fault. If you had explained your work to us properly, this wouldn't have happened. Then, looking back and forth between Mike and me, he said, Come on, we're family, right? Let's put the past behind us and work together as a family from now on. I promise I won't touch Lynn anymore. Astonished, I was at a loss for words, but before I could speak, Mike blurted out. Father, that's wrong. What do you mean? I can't forgive you for hurting Mom more than anything. You betrayed Mom, who supported us all these years. I don't consider you as family anymore, and certainly, I won't live with you. With that, my husband was left speechless and collapsed right there. Lynn, too, sat down on the floor in a daze. Leaving the two of them in the room, Mike and I left the house. My husband continued to plead with me to reconsider, but I hired a lawyer, and the divorce was successfully finalized. Naturally, I demanded alimony from my husband and Lynn. Since my husband had been fired, his severance pay went entirely to alimony, and now he's barely scraping by with part-time jobs. He also sold the house we had lived in for many years and now lives alone in an old, cramped apartment. He had dreamt of living a lively life with his son's family, but he must have never imagined ending up in such a miserable state in his later years. Mike and Lynn also divorced. After the divorce, Lynn scrambled to find a job, but with no work experience and a life lived selfishly, she couldn't manage to hold down a stable job. Her parents, furious about her misdeeds, were not an option for support, leaving her in no position to return home. Consequently, Lynn moved from one part-time job to another, eventually landing in an unspeakable profession, leading a life on a downward spiral. Meanwhile, Mike, deeply shocked by being betrayed by his wife, found it too painful to remember his married life and moved out of the apartment he shared with Lynn. I invited him to live in my spacious condo for a while, but he declined, saying, "I can't rely on you, Mom." It was honestly lonely living alone in such a large place. Still, Mike and I meet occasionally for meals and catch up. This distance is probably just right. As I roll up my sleeves and sit down at the computer, I am grateful for my caring son. I should turn the ordeal I've experienced into something productive for my work. My name is Helen, and I'm 68 years old. About 6 months ago, my only son, who is now 35, got married. After losing my husband, I raised him single-handedly, and now I finally feel a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. Honestly, I feel relieved to have passed the baton to his wife. Having decided to take it easy, I quit my job 3 months ago, so now I'm living on my pension. You can't do that, Helen. Many people age rapidly once they retire. The woman who took over the management of my lunch spot, Mary, says this as she nibbles on the homemade cookies she brought along. She's slightly older than my son, practically of an age to be my daughter, and she's been working at my shop since her high school days and is a veteran with over 20 years of experience. "I'll take over the shop if you're going to close it," Mary said, so I happily left it in her hands. It was a shop beloved by the locals for its cheap and tasty homemade-style lunch, and I would have been sad to close it. I knew she would perfectly continue the flavors. "Helen, you're not getting off so easily. Please help me think of a new menu for the fall," she said, spreading a thick recipe notebook on the table. Truthfully, I'm glad to be relied upon. Is your son getting along well in his married life? Since we've known each other for 2 decades, she naturally knows my son. I had hoped the two of them would get together, but unfortunately, that didn't happen. Well, I don't want to be a meddlesome mother-in-law, so I'm mostly hands-off. I handed over the 2-bedroom apartment where my son and I had lived to my son and his wife, and now I'm living alone in a studio apartment. My son's wife, Emily, is 32, 3 years younger than my son. They met through a mutual acquaintance and started dating. Not long after our first meeting, Emily mentioned, "This apartment is owned by you, isn't it, Helen? Isn't it a bit cramped for 3 people?" "Yes, it's quite old. Maybe you could rent an apartment nearby," I suggested. "But wouldn't it be financially secure for you to live alone and save on rent?" Emily countered. I married late, and my husband was 10 years older, so we thought we wouldn't have children. My husband was always a bachelor at heart, and the apartment we bought before marriage was just right for 2 people. We lived comfortably together and unexpectedly had a son. We were amazed at how adorable our child was. My husband, thinking about providing for our son, even in his 60s and 70s, was lost in a traffic accident. It happened just when our son was entering junior high school. My husband had thought ahead and had life insurance. Since the accident was entirely not his fault, we received a considerable amount of money, including damages. Considering that I had to live with my son from now on, I decided to start a small lunch shop, leveraging my best skill, cooking. The apartment filled with memories of my late husband is indeed, as Emily said, financially secure for me to rent a studio than for them to rent a whole apartment. After Emily left, I told my son. She's quite straightforward. Then my son says, "Yeah, she is. I'm not really good at reading between the lines, so I like that about her." My son said with a smile. If he's happy with her, I have no objections. Even though the couple cleverly landed a rent-free place, my son offered to pay for my new apartment's rent and help with the move in full. He told me, "Thank you. But don't worry about me. I'm sure you two will have plenty of things you need too. I'll ask you for help with moving, though. Despite what I said, I still felt a lingering unease after meeting Emily, whom I had just met that day. One day, I got a call from my son. "Hey, Mom. Wanna come over for dinner sometime soon?" My son and his wife had invited me. Although I was delighted with the invitation, the discussion that followed left me wringing my hands. Actually, Emily's cooking is. According to my son, who seemed to struggle to get the words out, Emily's cooking is apparently downright unpalatable. Apparently, she doesn't really enjoy cooking. She often resorts to deli food from the supermarket or frozen meals, which, according to my son, is much better than the dishes she makes. At first, my son tried to make various suggestions, like, "I want to eat this, it would be better if you did this," and, "Should I cook?" But every time, Emily would become extremely grumpy. "We used to always have cereal and fruits for breakfast, right? Emily wants energy bars." When I said I wanted to eat fruits for breakfast, she got upset. When I then said, "At least let's have cereal," she got even more upset, and the next morning, she silently served Creole without milk. I was at a loss for words hearing my son's lament. Dietary habits and preferences can be tricky. It might be one of the first obstacles a newly married couple encounters. Either way, since my son brought this up, it left me with a headache. "So, when you come over for dinner, could you subtly teach Emily about cooking?" I wasn't thrilled about the proposal. One evening, I was invited over to my son and his wife's place. Seeing my son after several months, I was shocked. He had lost a considerable amount of weight. The situation might be more serious than I thought. Being married for just over half a year, my son must have tried his best to improve their eating habits. His call to me was a distress signal. Their apartment had been remodeled since I lived there, and it felt oddly different. "Welcome, my mother-in-law." Emily greeted me cheerfully. When I handed her the cherries I had brought as a gift, she was delighted and told me, "Please sit and wait. I'll prepare the meal right away." She gave off the impression of a perfect wife. When I saw the dinner menu laid out on the table, I broke into a cold sweat. Fish fries, which are from supermarket deli food. Steaks seemed homemade, but slightly undercooked. Salad from a supermarket. Soup with onion and bacon. Pickles from a supermarket deli. I couldn't understand how, when inviting your mother-in-law over for dinner, the majority of the food could be supermarket deli items. To begin with, this menu is too heavy for a person nearing their 70s. The fish fries, if warmed in an oven with a baking sheet, would come out crispy. But she had heated it in the microwave, so it was soggy. The steaks were predictably undercooked in the center, and the soup had so much granulated soup stock that it was overpoweringly salty. I gently offered advice like, "If you do it this way, it will be much tastier." But she just became more upset. "You might want to grill the steaks a bit more. Raw meat could potentially cause food poisoning." When I made that comment, Emily quickly gathered up the dishes as if to snatch them away and reheated the steaks over high heat. She burnt them black and slammed the plate back down as if to say, "You can't complain now, can you?" "Oh, would you like some of my pickling jars and the syrup?" I said, thinking I was being helpful, but it seemed to touch a nerve with her. "I bought these pickles especially for your son because I know he loves them. I can't stand them and I don't even want to touch them. And you're asking me to take care for the stinky pickling syrup every day?" I guess making pickles might be a tough task for someone who doesn't like them. "And you used to feed him packed lunches all the time, didn't you? It's no different from supermarket food, is it?" The truth seemed to be getting sidetracked. Yes, I had fed him lunches from the store I ran, but it was no different from my homemade cooking. They weren't supermarket lunches, they were homemade lunches from the store my mother ran herself. I made sure to clarify that, didn't I? My son had to explain hastily. "So that's how it is, you're siding with your mother. Fine then. If you don't want to eat, don't." With a shout, she stormed off to the bedroom, leaving my son and I to sigh and stare at the untouched food on the table. "I'm sorry. I upset Emily." When I apologized, my son said, "Am I being too picky? But it's hard when it's every day. I'm really at my limit." He said this with a face half covered in tears. What should I have done? At any rate, it didn't look like my son's eating habits were going to improve. It was worrying, but I was unsure how much I should intervene. A few days later, Emily unexpectedly visited my apartment. I'm sorry about the other day. I was relieved to hear her apology, as I had thought she thoroughly disliked me. I served some of my best tea and biscuits, hoping to build rapport with my daughter-in-law. So, I hear you're wealthy, Helen. Emily's comment took me by surprise. I don't know what she heard from my son, but it's true that I have savings. It's money left by my late husband and what I've been saving bit by bit from running the lunch store. I want to try for a baby. Can you help us out a bit, Helen? She was 32. I understand her feelings well, as it's a critical age for women. I couldn't refuse when she asked for help. I took out $5,000 from my savings and handed it to her. I know it's tough, but hang in there as a couple. I was 33 when I had my son, so I understand how you feel. When I said this, Emily grumbled. Please don't pressure me just because you gave me money. She said that to me. I didn't quite understand why she was upset. I've heard it's hard for mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law to get along, and it seems it's really true. I'm active on social media, and a lot of people are criticizing you, you know. Emily showed me her phone screen. This probably happened during our dinner conversation the other day. There were numerous comments supporting her while vilifying me with foul language. I was shocked, but from a glance at the posts, I could tell that Emily had twisted the situation to make herself out as the victim. Mother and daughter-in-law not getting along, huh? I don't think it should be like that, but I'm starting to lose confidence that Emily and I can get along in the future. After a while, I called my son to talk about Emily's fertility treatments, and his reaction was surprising. I don't think she's doing anything like that. She doesn't like kids, and it's not like I'm insisting on having them. I had given her money because she said she needed it for fertility treatments. My son was very surprised to hear this. My son cleared up her misunderstanding and explained to her that I used the money my husband left me to start a small lunch shop, which had become quite popular locally. Emily seemed interested when she heard this and kept asking about my savings. Oh wow, she is so rich! Despite his confusion, my son responded. Well, maybe she has about $1 million? I'm sorry, I think I said something I shouldn't have. I'll check up on the fertility treatment thing, he said, and hung up. I felt uneasy as days passed without hearing back from him. Then another shocking thing happened. I received a charge on my credit card that I didn't recognize. I don't usually use my card. So I hurriedly checked. I found that my card was missing from my wallet. If I had lost my wallet, that would be one thing, but it's hard to believe that a card I rarely use would just fall out of it. What confirmed my suspicions even more was that the items purchased with that card were high-end branded bags and wallets. Emily must have secretly taken the card from my wallet the last time she visited. Not only did she deceive me into giving her $5,000 under the pretense of fertility treatments, but she also stole my card. This is a bigger problem than just her terrible cooking. I contacted the credit card company to freeze the card. Although family members who misuse a card are not usually held accountable, I couldn't let her keep spending my money. Did knowing I had savings blind her to reason? Originally, she probably wasn't after my property. I was kind of sad, but I couldn't just stay quiet. I was fed up with her cooking, so I reached out to my son in advance. Why don't you try my homemade cooking once in a while? When I suggested this, my son seemed more than happy. Emily might be upset again, but is that okay? When I asked him, he replied in a resigned tone. Yeah, I'm kinda at my limit too. I'm ready for whatever happens. The day, I brought all the ingredients to my son's apartment that day and prepared the meal in the kitchen I once knew so well. Emily stayed in the bedroom and didn't help me at all. She was probably writing nasty comments about me on social media again. Ah, delicious! This is it! You would understand if you tried it. My son was delighted to eat my cooking, so much so that one might think he was overdoing it. After all, I had only cooked his favorite dishes. However, after taking a sip of my soup, Emily frowned. Isn't this soup a bit bland? That's because you add too much granulated stock. The problem isn't the stock itself, but rather the quantity. I replied with a stern tone. Predictably, she stubbornly retorted. But it tastes better with more. Even supermarket ready-made food tastes different with a bit of extra effort. It's a lifesaver for busy homemakers. I've been selling boxed lunches for busy people all my life. But you're not working, Emily, so you have plenty of time to cook, don't you? I asked. Caught off guard, she fell silent for a moment, then snapped. I can't make these bland, old people's meals. She spat out her words with contempt. Even my son seemed to lose his temper at this. Or rather, he'd probably been fed up for quite a while. If you say you can't make it, then fine. You probably didn't even want to cook in the first place, did you? This grilled fish, the stuffed bell peppers, the soup, the pickles. They all taste 100 times better than your cooking. Emily, getting an earful from my son, angrily stood up and shouted. Oh, I can't take it anymore. If I knew you were such a mama's boy, I wouldn't have married you. Does a son praising his mother's cooking make him a mama's boy? I stopped Emily as she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the room. Wait a minute. That bag, it's the new product from that brand, isn't it? She flinched for a moment, then replied. Huh? Yes, what about it? She seemed determined to play innocent. You see, I got a bill for a bag from that brand, purchased with my card. I had no idea, so I thought it was strange. I confronted her directly, but she didn't flinch. Huh? Helen, maybe you forgot about your own shopping? It happens when you get older. Ignoring my point, she tried to blame it on my cognitive abilities. My son, who had been silent without understanding the situation, interjected. Hey, didn't you buy a wallet along with that bag? Yes, the charge from the credit company included both the bag and the wallet. It came to a total of $3,000. Hey, why does the bill for your shopping go to my mom? She stole my card from my purse. Upon my revelation, my son slumped his shoulders in dismay. You stole her card? What were you thinking? That's criminal behavior, even if we're family. Even as she was berated by my son, she showed no remorse and shrugged. Oh, come on, I didn't steal it. I just borrowed it. Helen has enough with her pension, right? Money isn't something you can take with you when you die, so it's better to spend it. Her words were no excuse at all, but she didn't seem to think she'd done anything wrong. So, you even lied about wanting to have a baby to squeeze money out of my mom? I wasn't lying. I really did intend to. But it seemed like such a big deal. And it seemed like it would be tough on you too, so I thought you might not want to. Her words were as if she had given up thinking about my son's sake. I wasn't informed of anything. It seemed my son had also realized that talking with her was futile. I didn't care whether my son and Emily had children. As long as my son could live happily with Emily, that would be enough. But it seemed that was an impossible wish. It may be enough for me to live on my pension. Indeed, I do have savings. As I began, Emily's eyes brightened as if she thought her point had been proven. Huh? I told you so, didn't I? I overrode Emily's attempt to interrupt. That money isn't for me. It's for my son and his family. I don't recognize you as family. It's not your money to spend. Her face turned from red to blue, then she retorted. What are you talking about? I'm your son's wife, aren't I? Aren't we family? And she pouted. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to say that. My son slowly began to speak. I don't want to be married to you anymore. Let's get a divorce. At the moment she heard these words, she lost her temper and started screaming. Are you out of your mind? Why are we suddenly talking about divorce? This isn't sudden. I've been thinking about it for months. It's not your fault you're not good at cooking. But you never tried to make an effort, did you? My son must have been really frustrated with his wife's cooking, but you can't get divorced just because someone isn't a good cook. Do you have any evidence that I haven't made any effort? She argued like a school kid. Finally, I couldn't stay quiet any longer. Look, cooking is about considering the person who's going to eat it. It's not about being good or bad at it. There are recipes that anyone can follow to cook a dish. You never even asked me once what your husband's favorite meal is, did you? Also, maybe being bad at cooking isn't a reason for divorce, but the fact that you lied to me to extort money, and that you stole cards to go shopping, are crimes, right? Those are valid reasons for divorce. If my son wants a divorce, I will support him. What's the matter with you two? Like mother, like son. His wife burst into a rage and started throwing around unpleasant words, but my son coldly pushed her away saying, I don't want to dislike you any more than I already do. Can you please be quiet? My son coldly shut her down, and then it finally went quiet. If you don't want a divorce, go ahead and seek mediation or take it to court. I don't think you'll win though. If you agree to part ways amicably, I'll give you that designer handbag and wallet. I'll repay the money my mom lost due to your fertility treatment scam as well. My son seemed determined. I didn't really need him to repay me, but I decided to keep silent about it. What? A scam? How awful that sounds. You think you can pay me off with just this? You must be joking. She tried to argue further. All right. In that case, I'm going to charge everything to you. Wait for it. Upon hearing my son's parting words, it seemed that she finally realized her disadvantage. After a while, Emily, who took over my shop, came by with her recipe notebook. She wanted to consult about the Christmas menu. When I told her about the struggle with my daughter-in-law, she said sympathetically, "That must have been tough." My son's divorce was finalized, and his ex-wife packed her belongings and left. In the end, I returned to my old apartment and once again began living with my son. The acquaintance who introduced my former daughter-in-law, perhaps feeling guilty, informed my son about her subsequent life. The fact that she couldn't cook at all, her criminal behavior and constant verbal abuse towards me, were becoming well known, and she seemed to have lost all her friends. Well, not just this time, but I feel, rather late in the game, that her character was problematic to begin with. It seems she's actively trying to get remarried, but maybe her gold-digging intentions are too transparent, as she can't seem to make any romantic connections. I can only hope there won't be any more victims like us. But it might be tough for a daughter-in-law if the mother-in-law is a good cook. Food habits can be very different depending on the region. It's a tricky issue, isn't it? Emily made a poignant remark. That's true. If you were my daughter-in-law, things wouldn't have turned out like this. After all, you can perfectly replicate my cooking. When I casually said that, she blushed and replied, "Please stop. Don't tease a nearly 40-year-old single woman like that." My son, who was drinking coffee next to us, said, "Mary is not an old lady. You were actually my crush when I was in high school. I thought you were awesome for being beautiful and a great cook." And turned red, creating a strange atmosphere. What? You should have told me that at the time. Well, you treated me like a kid since I was younger and in high school. Watching the two of them joking around, I started to think, could this possibly lead to something more? If these three of us could become a family, it would surely work out well. If that's the case, we'd need a bigger kitchen. While thinking about this, I couldn't help but smile. To capture a man's heart, you start with his stomach. Maybe that old saying has some truth to it. Sure, but you're going to be the one supporting those 5 brats. I'm taking the house, huh? Upon my declaration of wanting a divorce, Mike accepted it with gleeful arrogance. Prompted by his words, I immediately prepared to leave the house. But the one who would suffer once I left was Mike himself. When would he realize that, I wondered. A small laugh escaped me as I envisioned Mike's struggle. My name is Sarah Jackson. 35 years old. Mike and I hit it off in college when we were part of the same club. After several years of dating, we tied the knot. While we were together, it seemed Mike always put me first. I never demanded special treatment, but I didn't dislike him being considerate, so I accepted everything he did. He had promised during his proposal, "I will definitely make you happy, Sarah. I love you more than anyone in the world. Marry me." I loved Mike dearly, so I accepted his proposal. I was genuinely excited to see the kind of home we'd build together. Mike wanted many kids and to live in a large, luxurious house. I was all for that. Let's work hard together. Yeah. We used to assure each other like that. After marriage, Mike's attitude started to feel a bit indifferent. Did our married life not meet his expectations? Or did he start to dislike me? Despite all my speculations, I could never understand Mike's feelings. Our married life wasn't particularly disrupted, so I let it be. Maybe someday, he'd return to his gentle, caring self. That was my hope. Several months later, we had a baby boy. To our surprise, we had twins. I knew they were twins from the checkups, but seeing them after birth is overwhelming. We really have to work hard to raise them. Sure. Even though Mike was the one who wanted kids so much, he seemed distant somehow. He even resisted when I tried to get him to hold our babies. Why won't you hold them? Look how cute they are. Well, I just don't know how to handle them. If that was his reason, I could somewhat understand. I thought we'd get used to it together. About 3 months passed since our twins were born. But Mike still didn't engage with them. He didn't just avoid holding them, it seemed like he was evading them. I tried my best to bring Mike closer to our kids, but nah, I'm good. That's not okay, Mike. You should have a bit more responsibility. You are a father after all. I wanted to say that, but I figured Mike must be tired too, so I held my tongue. Moreover, while Mike seemed uninterested in interacting with the children, he was working hard and providing for the family. So, I didn't feel like complaining. Later, Mike approached me again, saying he wanted more kids. Hey, what do you think? But I can't take care of 3 kids all by myself. The other 2 are still small. If Mike would help, it'd be fine, but I was pretty sure I'd be the one doing all the parenting. If we're considering another child, Mike needs to help too. I implied this in our conversation, and Mike leaned forward and said, I'm sorry for until now. From now on, I'll take proper care. I'll work harder and I'll take care of the kids too. Remember when we got married, I said I wanted lots of kids? Yes, but... Please. Mike was pleading more earnestly than usual. With him begging like that, I couldn't say no. When the baby is born, we have to responsibly nurture each life, okay? You understand? Of course. Well then. After observing Mike's behavior, I decided to have another child. However, things didn't go as I had expected. Surprisingly, although we planned to have just one more kid, it turned out that I was pregnant with triplets. Could such a thing even happen? While having lots of children is indeed joyous, the more there are, the more money it takes and the heavier the responsibility. Hey, Mike. You see, I told Mike that we were having triplets. Mike was elated and said, Really? That's wonderful. I'll work even harder. If Mike was this committed, it should be okay. I was able to face childbirth with relief. Fast forward 2 years later. Our family was far from happy, it was almost in shambles. We never got to live in the luxurious house we talked about when we got married. Instead, we had moved into a cheaper house. The house was an old, inexpensive apartment. Its age was showing, and in no uncertain terms, it was run down. But with 5 small kids, the house went from bad to worse in no time. I dread to think about the repair costs when we move out. I'm already feeling the chills thinking about it. Ideally, I'd like to have time to educate our kids, but unfortunately, I'm the only one raising them. Ever since our triplets were born, Mike lost interest in both me and our children. Before they were born, he had promised to help with the household chores and raising the children, but now it's quite the opposite. Hey, Mike. Look after the kids. I can't handle 5 on my own. Why should I care? I'm busy with work. Have you forgotten I'm working for this family? Besides, you're a stay-at-home mom, you should be able to look after 5 kids. But there has to be a limit. Enough already. I have a meeting to attend. I don't know when I'll be back. See ya. Mike always made up some excuse to avoid discussing things with me. By this time, the kids were able to talk and express their wishes. When they wanted to play with their dad and approached Mike. I'm busy right now. Sarah, take care of this. Take care of this. Mike was the one who wanted lots of kids, but he refuses to take care of them and seems to find them bothersome. The kids stopped approaching Mike because of his consistently abusive behavior. But that wasn't the end of Mike's outrageous behavior. He also stopped contributing his earnings to our family. Mike has always loved traveling and socializing. Before the kids were born, he used to say he wanted to travel as a family, but now I wonder if he even remembers that. Mike only gives me the bare minimum amount of money and spends the rest on his hobbies. Mike, think more about our family. At this rate, I can't even feed the kids. But we've been managing so far, haven't we? Stop being so selfish. We have enough money. I'm the one who's earning it after all. True, we've managed somehow up till now. But that's because I've been trying so hard. I've been cutting back on our expenses to save money for the kids' education. Now, I can only afford to eat 2 meals a day, if I'm lucky. Mostly, I have to make do with just 1 meal. Also, I've been taking care of the rundown parts of our house on my own. That said, it's nothing fancy. I've only done basic repairs to make it look decent. But Mike probably doesn't know any of this. He comes home drunk almost every night. Before we knew it, our home was no longer the fun and happy place we had envisioned when we first got married. It had turned into a gloomy, conversation-free hell. When did it become like this? What choices did I make wrong? The more I think about it, the more I realize that Mike is the cause. If only he could rethink his views on family and children, things might get a little better. Sigh. Looking at the dwindling money and bank balance, all I could do was sigh. Around this time, I seriously started considering divorce. If I stay with Mike, I can't imagine our children growing up healthy. Even now, the atmosphere at home is like a funeral. What's going to happen when the kids hit puberty and start growing up? I subtly asked the kids how they would feel about living apart from Mike. Hey, would you be sad if Mom and Dad started living separately? No. As long as I'm with you, Mom. My oldest son answered with a smile. I asked the other kids as well, and they all gave the same answer. While I was happy with their responses, I also felt a bit complicated. One morning, while I was going through all this, I woke up feeling extremely dizzy, to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. Somehow I mustered up the strength to get up and went to the living room. The kids were preparing breakfast and getting dressed by themselves. But Mike was different. Hey, Sarah. What have you been doing? Where's my breakfast? My clothes? Wait a minute. Hurry up. I'll be late for work. Okay. I pushed myself to the limit, making preparations for Mike. Without a word of thanks, Mike grumbled as he left for work. Well, a little sleep would probably do the trick. I explained to the kids that I was not feeling well and decided to sleep on the living room couch. Unlike Mike, the kids understood that I was not well. A little sleep would make things better, I thought. But then, Hey! I opened my eyes at the sound of Mike's voice. Mike seemed to be pretty angry. Welcome back. What's the deal, not having dinner ready when I get home? And the dishes are still from this morning, and you haven't even cleaned up properly. What are you thinking? You're a stay-at-home mom, you could at least do your job properly. Something inside me snapped at these words. And you, always at work, what gives you the right to say that? What? I appreciate that you're working. But is it necessary to say so much when a family member is not feeling well and is struggling? I'm doing my best too. You promised to help with childcare and housework when we have kids, so why has it come to this? I was a fool for believing in you. It's not fair to the kids. Mike looked startled. He hadn't expected me to fight back so forcefully. But he quickly recovered and countered. I don't know, it's your job to support me, isn't it? You should consider me as your top priority. Me first, even before the kids. Got it? I realized that even the kids, who Mike had been so eager to have, were now irrelevant to him, and it saddened me. Do you really think so? What? Of course. I don't care about the kids anymore. I mean, why did we have so many kids? We didn't need 5. My husband, speaking such things casually in front of our children. Something's wrong with him as a person, let alone a parent. At the same time, thanks to Mike's remarks, I realized what he thinks about our family and children. He really didn't care about the kids or me. I couldn't stand it anymore and said, Let's get a divorce. I've had enough. Mike responded without surprise, but rather with a confident look. Fine, but you can have the 5 brats. As for the division of property, I'm taking the house. He accepted more easily than I thought, but it seemed he was misunderstanding something. Does he even understand the meaning of the division of property? I'm in such mental distress, I could ask for alimony. Well, if he takes the unusually expensive house, that's fine with me. The next day. Luckily, I was feeling better, so I went to see the divorce lawyer. On the way home, looking at the divorce paper, I was relieved to finally be able to separate from Mike. At the same time, it reminded me of the past. We used to talk about wanting to build a happy home when we first got married. On the way back from the lawyer's office, I realized I was crying as I thought about various things. When Mike came home at night, I handed him the business card of my lawyer and said, From now on, all matters concerning the divorce will be dealt through the lawyer. And so, we divorced, but I had no worries at all. Because I had a strong ally on my side. The one who will be in trouble when I leave the house is Mike himself. I wonder when he will realize that. I couldn't help but laugh at the thought of Mike struggling. From the time I started contemplating divorce, I began consulting a certain person. This person wasn't my parents or my in-laws, but my sister, Amy. Amy and I have always been very close, and I have fond memories of us playing together when we were young. Hey, sis, I need some advice. Advice? That's unusual for you, Sarah. Despite her surprise, I told Amy about my issues with Mike. He wanted children, but he didn't contribute to childcare. He was constantly working and didn't pay attention to our home life. He only gave me the bare minimum in terms of money, and basically spent everything else on his hobbies. As I explained my situation, I could tell Amy was getting visibly angry. And as soon as I finished talking, Amy raised her voice. Wait! Isn't that just the worst? I know, right? Amy huffed in anger. Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? I'm sorry. I didn't want to cause any trouble. That's so like you, Sarah, always thinking about others before yourself. Even though she seemed exasperated, Amy understood my situation. You're planning to get divorced, aren't you? When are you going to do it? I don't know. Well, if anything happens, feel free to come to me right away. I'll prepare so you can bring all the kids, too. Amy's words, followed by her reassuring smile, gave me strength. I contacted Amy and arranged to move into her house. The kids are fond of Amy too, which gives me peace of mind. Seeing how exhausted I was from my life with Mike, Amy actively helped out with household chores and looking after the kids. I felt guilty having her do so much for me, so I asked her to take a break a few times. However, she reassured me each time, so I gratefully accepted her help. Amid all this, I found a certain job. It was a data entry job that could be done from home. This job would allow me to earn money without putting a strain on my body. Currently, I am relying on Amy's support and my savings, but I feel bad depending on her forever. Amy agreed with my plan, so I was able to concentrate on my work. Compared to before, every day feels blissful. Of course, that's not to say I've completely forgotten about Mike. The emotional scars are still there, lingering. About 2 months had passed, I think. While I was working from home, my smartphone suddenly rang. Looking at the screen, I saw Mike's name displayed. What could he possibly want at this point? Not wanting to talk to Mike, I ignored the call. After a few rings, the call ended. Finally, it stopped. Just as I thought that, the phone started ringing again. Despite repeatedly ignoring his calls, the phone continued to ring incessantly from Mike. Annoyed, I finally picked up the phone, ready to let him have it. What do you want, Mike? You're being persistent. Hey, what did you do with the money? Huh? The money? What are you talking about? The reason Mike had called me was that the money in our joint account had disappeared. But there was no way I could know about that. After all, Mike had the debit card, and as the account book was paper-based, there's no way I could have it after our divorce. I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you asking me? You're the only one who could have withdrawn the money. You've always complained about not having money. It must have been you. What? What are you even saying? First of all, you're the one holding the debit card, and if you can check the balance, that means you have the account book, right? You've spent too much. Upon hearing this, Mike raised his voice even more. Overspending money? That can't be true. Even if I was, it shouldn't run out. When we were married, it never ran out, did it? It's inconceivable that it could all suddenly vanish now that I'm alone. Oh, he just doesn't understand. Doesn't understand how much I've been struggling. Listen, Mike. I tried to explain, but Mike cut me off. And what's up with this wall and the faucets? You didn't tell me they were all beat up. You just dumped this crappy house on me. Don't you have any human decency? You're the one lacking human decency. Before I knew it, I had raised my voice. I glanced over at Amy, worrying I had shocked her, but instead of looking surprised, she was laughing. She mouthed, "Tell him off even more. I don't think you realized, but those walls and faucets, they were always broken. I was the one who somehow fixed it and continued living. And about the money, I was the one cutting corners and struggling. I even dipped into my own savings." But Mike didn't seem to believe a word I said. "Stop lying. I did nothing wrong. It's all your fault." Where on earth does he get this confidence from? I'm questioning why I ever fell for such a man. And you know what? If you had worked harder as a housewife, none of this would have happened. I'm a divorcee, you know? A divorcee. This is ruining my reputation with women. On the other end of the phone, Mike is still ranting on. What could I possibly say to make him understand? While I was thinking, Amy came up to me. Once again, she mouthed, "Can I borrow your phone?" Amy must have heard everything Mike was saying. I thought she had something to say, so I handed her my phone. "Mike? Can you hear me?" "Huh? Who is this?" "I was talking to Sarah. Do you think it's okay to talk like that? Do you know who I am?" With that, Mike finally fell silent. After a brief pause, he spoke again. His voice clearly terrified, even over the phone. "Could it be? Amy. That's right. You sure gave my sister a hard time, didn't you?" Mike has always said he was scared of Amy. His reason was simple, he just found her intimidating. Considering he'd been bad-mouthing her, I could understand why he was scared now. "But why is Amy? You're really not the brightest, are you?" "I was with Sarah. Also, she's staying at my place now, with the kids." "Is that so? Then, I'll come over right." "Don't be stupid." Mike doesn't know where Amy lives. I can hear him trying to wheedle the address out of her on the other end of the phone, but of course Amy isn't giving it to him. All I can do is watch the two of them talk. I believe in Amy, she can handle Mike. I've always known Amy was strong. I've heard the whole story from Sarah. You make the kids but don't take care of them, you yell at Sarah to do the housework even when she's unwell, and then you call complaining about not having money or how the house is falling apart. You're really the lowest of the low, Mike. That's... Overwhelmed by Amy's pressure, Mike was finally lost for words. But Amy continued, unfazed, voicing her thoughts. About getting alimony, about not contributing to the household, about referring to his own precious children as brats. He'd done nothing but the worst things to me when I think about it now. Do you even realize what a scumbag you've been? Try looking at yourself objectively. How would you like it if all this happened to you? You wouldn't like it, would you? No, I wouldn't. Well, that's what you did to Sarah. You accused her of not having a heart, but you're the one without a heart. After saying what she needed to, Amy handed the phone back to me. Mike. At the sound of his name, Mike responded, his voice choked with tears. Sarah, I really messed up. I'm really sorry. Let's start over. This time, I'll do the housework and help with the kids. After getting an earful from Amy, it seems like Mike has done some reflecting. But there was no way I was going to forgive him. You can say what you want, but you haven't done anything for us until now. I don't expect anything from you anymore. We're divorced, remember? We're complete strangers. But... no, enough. That's enough. I didn't want anything to do with you, that's why I didn't ask for any money. But now, I'll be demanding child support. And of course, for all 5 children. The moment I mentioned child support, Mike clearly started to panic, muttering complaints under his breath. Next to me, Amy gave me a thumbs up, saying, "Good for you. So, you can expect a call from my lawyer soon." Hey, wait a minute. I ignored Mike's words and hung up the phone. Afterwards, he called several times, but I ignored them all. Eventually, Mike seemed to give up and stopped calling. I immediately consulted with my lawyer and filed for child support. Of course, Mike contacted me, saying let's talk it out, but there was no way I was going to do that. I refused Mike's proposal. In the end, it seemed that Mike had resigned himself to the fact that he would have to pay child support. Now, the child support is being paid in full every month. This is just a guess, but I wonder if Mike is now living without any savings or money. But, I don't feel sorry for him at all. I want him to reflect on how he's ignored us all these years. Me and the kids are still being taken care of at Amy's house. I've offered to leave several times, but Amy always kindly insists that I stay. But things are different now. I've calmed down a lot, so I decided to start working part-time at a local supermarket. This should ease the financial burden. From now on, I've decided to cherish the kids who have unfortunately caused so much distress, and Amy who has helped us out this time.